You know what comes next? Chances are you haven't heard or seen some of these regularly for 20 years, but somehow we still remember them. For me personally, there's a special feeling attached, one that's hard to explain, which is odd because at the time, this was the part of the experience I just wanted to get through. I don't think I know anybody who turned on a PlayStation because they wanted to watch the PlayStation logo. We wanted to play our games, and the startup kind of was just in the way. And if that was the case, why did the part standing between us and these games become almost as memorable as the games themselves? Now, nostalgia can explain why hearing them, seeing them still feels good today, but it doesn't explain why those few seconds became so important in the first place. And this is where it starts to get interesting, because long before these startups became memories, they existed to solve a problem most of us never even knew was there. So what problem were these startup animations solving? Well, you see, that's just it, the problem of waiting. Once consoles became more complex, turning them on didn't always mean you could just jump right into your game. Sometimes they needed a few seconds to wake up, so to speak, and Sony found a way to use them. Takafumi Fujisawa, and excuse my pronunciation, created the famous startup sound for the original PlayStation. He has said that part of its job was actually practical. It helped reassure us that our PlayStations were actually working, and that it was reading the disc you just put inside. In a way, it was kind of like those numbers above an elevator door that light up. They don't get the elevator to you any faster, but while you're waiting, it is reassuring to know that something is happening. The PlayStation startup was doing the same thing, which makes one of gaming's most iconic sounds basically a very sophisticated way of saying,
"I'm working here."
Years later, the original Xbox had the same basic problem. The hard drive and DVD drive needed time to get themselves ready. According to Xbox audio designer Brian Schmidt, Microsoft had around 8 seconds where the machine was working, but the player was just waiting. And 8 seconds doesn't sound like much until you remember those few seconds I made you sit through about a minute ago. Because when you expect something to happen and nothing happens, it can feel very uncomfortable. So Microsoft filled that time with this. So suddenly that strange green nuclear reactor swirling around inside your television makes a little more sense now, doesn't it? The console just wasn't ready yet. So Microsoft gave us something to fill that time. But here's the part I hadn't really considered. Once designers had those few seconds anyway, they could decide how those seconds would feel. Once you look at these startups in that way, something becomes very obvious. They were all solving roughly the same problem, but they sure didn't feel the same. Take the original PlayStation. This completely blew me away at the time, like a door was opening into a much bigger gaming world. Fujisawa actually said he wanted the sound to move from reassurance into excitement, something like walking into a movie theater knowing you were about to see something awesome. And then Sega came back with the Dreamcast. When I first saw this intro, it was like Sega's whole attitude had changed. They were no longer in your face, screaming their brand name. They were trying to convince gamers that this was a new beginning, a fresh start. It didn't feel like the machine was trying to overwhelm you. It felt like it knew exactly what it was and exactly what it needed to do, which really makes it all the more heartbreaking that the Dreamcast ultimately failed. And then Nintendo showed up with the GameCube. And Nintendo's message was so simple with the GameCube. Basically, this thing plays games. In fact, their slogan was literally "Born to Play." And that entire idea is wrapped up in this little animation. It's as if the logo itself becomes a toy and says, "Come on, let's play." Because that's exactly how the GameCube was designed. And then Microsoft entered the console business. Yeah, that's not subtle. Brian Schmidt remembers one of the ideas behind Xbox as this image of enormous power trying to break free from the machine, which I guess explains this entire startup. Xbox hadn't even loaded a game yet, and it was already telling you this thing is powerful. So, what did each of these consoles have in common? Well, they all had the same basic weight at the start, but they all handled them with a completely different feeling. What's interesting is the game hadn't even started on any of them, but the experience had already begun. And maybe none of this would even matter very much if we only experienced it one time. But we didn't. We experienced it every time. What does that repetition do? Well, for me personally, one of these intros feels way different than all of the others. The Dreamcast. When I hear and see that startup intro now, I don't just think about the console or the games. I think about where I was in life. I just finished school, I was working full time, I was becoming an adult, relatively speaking, but suddenly I didn't have nearly as much time for games as I used to, so that time started to feel more valuable. My life was changing, and gaming felt like it was changing too. When I hear those few seconds today, all of that comes back, that whole time period of my life, and I don't think I'm the only one that experiences it that way. Now, maybe yours is the PlayStation or the GameCube or something else, but I think that's why these intros can hit so hard. They don't just remind us of what we played or were playing at the time. Sometimes they remind us of who we were at that time. They can take you back to a room or your group of friends, a point in your life that felt completely ordinary while you were living it, which is powerful when you think about it. How can 5 seconds of video and sound bring back all these vivid memories from 25 years ago? Researchers have actually studied something very close to this. Not console startups specifically, but familiar music. And they found that familiar music can bring back memories from our past surprisingly quickly. One study even found that memories triggered by music contained more vivid details than memories triggered by famous faces. So apparently, an old CD collection makes a better time machine than a stack of old Teen Beat magazines. Thank God. Part of the reason seems to be that the sound was there when those memories were initially made. So when you hear it again years later, it gives your brain a shortcut back to the time and place where you heard it. Kind of like the shortcuts on your desktop. They don't contain the program, they just tell your computer where to find it. Which makes my reaction to the Dreamcast startup make more sense. That intro isn't carrying my memories from 25 years ago inside of it. It's more like a pointer back to when those memories happened. And that might be why these startups often bring back details that have almost nothing to do with the console or gaming itself. Things like a room or people or what life felt like at the time. Researchers have even found that music from a particular time in your life tends to bring back memories from that same period, which is why hearing the Macarena can instantly take me back to an oddly specific memory I have of watching a news report with my parents some 30 years ago. So maybe nostalgia isn't really the explanation here, it's the result. These startup animations became tied to particular moments in our lives, and years later, they're still capable of taking us back there. Which makes what happened next kind of ironic, because eventually, consoles got good enough that we didn't need those few seconds of startup time anymore. Okay, so that's not literally true. Modern consoles still have startup screens, but the way that we encounter them has changed. With older generations, turning the system on usually meant starting from the beginning. You'd press the power button, you'd see that startup screen, you'd get to the title screen, and now you can play the game. But over the next few generations, consoles got much better at letting us skip that sequence. And today, features like sleep mode and quick resume can get you back into a game with barely any interruption at all. And that is better technology. I certainly don't want to trade my SSDs for mechanical hard drives just so gaming can feel old school again. But I think there's a small difference in the experience that's easy to miss. It got me thinking, why do we wrap gifts? If somebody hands you the exact same gift already unwrapped, you're still getting the same thing. In fact, technically, you're getting it faster. And yet, there's still something special about receiving a gift that's been wrapped. I think it's because the wrapping gives you one last little moment of anticipation. You know something good is there, you just haven't gotten to it yet. And I think those old startup sequences did something similar. No, they weren't the gift. They weren't even something we necessarily wanted to sit through. But they gave playing the game a brief moment of anticipation before it began. And today, that anticipation is much easier to skip. And I'm not saying that's worse, it's just different. Technology got so good at removing the wait that the little ritual built around the wait became optional too. I don't think any of this means we actually miss waiting. I know I certainly don't. Well, sometimes I do, but I think that is just nostalgia. To me, what made these startups memorable wasn't the wait itself. It's that they told us something awesome was about to happen. And over time, they became tied with all the memories that followed. I guess you could say at first they pointed forward, but years later, ironically, they point backward. Those startups became memorable not because of what happened during them, but because of everything that happened after. So, what startup animation does that for you? Not just which one is your favorite, but where does hearing it take you? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you made it this far, as always, thank you so much for watching. And until next time, happy gaming, my friends.